Welcome back to The Sensitivity Doctor. This is your host, Dr. Amelia Kelley, and I'm thrilled to have you here today to talk about a topic that we don't talk about enough, grief. Rebecca Feinglos, who is the founder of Grieve Leave, which she created in response to losing her parents in 2021. First, she lost her mother when she was younger as a child, and then her father at the beginning of COVID, and she wasn't quite sure how to handle it. Through her year of leave from working, she discovered so many things that she is now imparting on a huge community, and now today she's sharing her wisdom with you. One of my favorite things about her, though, is that not only is she knowledgeable, but gosh, her ability to see what you're going through and grieve with you, to like allow people to have these spaces. They even have these things called sad hours, which sound really fun. I'd kind of like to go to one and see what it's like. But how do we also help people who are highly sensitive grieve? We talk about how the highly sensitive system can be more activated by grief and what to do about it. And we also talk about how people who are not normally sensitive can feel grief and feel more sensitive after going through grief. So this is an episode that I think is long overdue, that we should be talking more about so that we can support ourselves and support others who go through losses, which we all experience on a human level almost every day, and we will all experience at some point in our life. So I hope you enjoyed this episode and there's something you can take away for yourself, or maybe even someone you love. So after you've listened, you might find this is an episode you want to share with someone else who has lost a similar person that you have, or someone else who has had a loss and you don't really know what to say or do to support them. This is an awesome episode to share with them as a way to show them that you care and that you're here. Enjoy. I'm really interested in, genuinely interested in your mission and what you're doing, because
Sure.
I feel like grief is not like a super sexy thing that everyone's scrambling to explore, but you're somehow you're somehow making it that way a little bit.
Yeah.
So what led you from going from, as you were saying, like a kindergarten school teacher to, I don't know, like a grief aficionado? I don't even know how to describe what you're doing. So maybe you could kind of start by explaining a bit about, what led you here, your work. And I know you've had your own losses that have,
Sure.
like anything. I mean, we go through something and then it motivates our passion. So take it away.
Like changes the way that we think about the world. Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back in time a little bit here. So I'm born and raised here in Durham, in North Carolina.
Okay.
And my late parents, both of whom have died, so spoiler for listeners, but they came down in the 70s. So early 70s, my dad started his residency at Duke, was a physician for 50 years. My mom ran the Duke Medical Center Library, so very Duke family, very Durham, North Carolina.
Why are
family.
You wearing powder blue then? No,
Okay, listen, must we look at my whole background though? It's like
all right. I'll give it to you. I could care less. I'm from upstate New York. We don't really care about college sports up there.
My dad was from Syracuse. Syracuse cares.
Oh, yeah, you're right. You're right. That's like the one school in the entire state that does care. You're right. I will give you that.
Syracuse cares a lot. Where are you from?
Kind of like the Broome County area. So really just south of there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Amazing.
Yeah.
I always drive through like the entire state of New York to get to Montreal, which is where my late mother was from. My parents met at McGill.
Okay.
So I had two northern parents.
Yeah.
And so my brother and I are first generation Southerners, though my brother moved to Canada 6-7 years ago and now has a wonderful wife. And I have a new nephew, which is
like,
very
I can't
exciting.
take it anymore.
It was like fast forwarding, because everyone died in my family. My grandmother needed someone to take care of her. And so my brother and I, at the ages of 27 and 25, had to decide between the two of us who was going to handle her and be her primary caregiver. And we decided together it would be my brother, just for a variety of different professional and personal reasons. And he's been there ever since. She died in 2022 at the age of 98, which raises the average age of death for my family members, which I'll take. I'll take it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Anyway, so
you've everything. Well, and it's amazing too when I hear you, because I feel like, I have a client who has lost both of her parents. She's in her early 40s. In one session, we were talking about how sometimes it feels like things are a little out of order.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think I had tried very hard my entire childhood and young adult life to create order and create linearity to what I was building professionally and personally. Because the message that I got as a child, as my mom was diagnosed with brain cancer when I was 5, she lived for
Wow.
8 years with glioblastoma and then the impacts of the experimental treatment she was on, which is a
Yeah.
long time to live
Yeah.
after a glioblastoma. But in that time, the messaging that I received was, well, Rebecca is doing well because she is successful in school and has a lot of friends. And therefore, again, the message that was emphasized for me and that I really internalized was, so if I just keep achieving and if I just keep like looking good and telling myself that I feel good, then I don't even know what grief is. What's that? It didn't even cross my mind that I was
Yeah.
grieving for my mother. It was something to outrun that I never even recognized I was even outrunning in the first place.
Right.
And everything was going according to this very linear plan in my life. I had always wanted to be in public service. Coming back to North Carolina eventually was always the goal. But I graduated from Duke. I joined Teach for America, to what we were just talking about. I was a bilingual kindergarten teacher, Spanish and English, in Fort Worth, Texas.
Oh, amazing.
And
I'm
then I
terrible
worked
at
for Teach for
languages. That's
America.
why I'm like
Oh my
amazing.
God. No, I love yapping in many languages.
I'm good at English.
I love that. I can speak the tiniest bit of French because of my time in Montreal and
Un peu.
connection there. Un petit peu. And then I went to University of Chicago for graduate school, worked for the mayor of Chicago, came home to North Carolina, built a career in early childhood policy, got married somewhere in there. And I had just really like, yay me, like all the gold stars. It was going great seemingly. And then my dad died very suddenly on March 14th, 2020, day one of COVID lockdown.
Oh
On
my
the
goodness.
same day that I had called him 2 hours earlier on my way
Sorry, I
in.
just got
Yeah,
stunned by the day that you said that that
it's
happened.
shocking. It's
It's
shocking.
so shocking just because I feel like the whole world stopped
Yes.
on that
Yeah.
day. Yeah.
Well,
Wow.
what was crazy is because I was in the government policy world here in North Carolina. And so that morning, I had already gotten a crazy world stopping phone call from my boss saying, we need you to come in to a secure location in Raleigh where we are working with the governor's team to shut down schools across North Carolina. And that I was a senior person in our administration with education experience. So I was going to be leading those conversations about our strategy of how we were going to shut down schools. I called my dad on the way in to Raleigh. I just called him because we were incredibly close. And I would call him about all kinds of interesting things in my life. And I was like, guess what I'm going to go do today on a Saturday morning? Isn't that wild? I guess this COVID thing is, real. And he told me he was proud of me and that he loved me. And 2 hours later, as I was leading this meeting, I was getting many phone calls repeatedly from my dad remarried from her. And I was told by a colleague my phone was just ringing off the hook, and she brought it to me. And I stepped out, and that's when I got the news that my dad had died. Totally out of the blue,
Oh my
totally
gosh.
unexpected. Yeah. And so, to your point, my earth shattered. Like the world as I
Yeah.
knew it was, it just didn't make any
Over.
sense.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the same day that the world locked down, I was like trapped in this nightmare of, oh my God, my person is gone.
Right.
But that kind of set off a lot of rethinking for me about who I want to be and how I want to show up in this world, how I want to be in relationship with other people. And that set off many dominoes, like my divorce a year later, like me leaving my job, like me starting Grieve Leave eventually, which started as a blog and then grew into a company. And here I am talking to amazing people like you now.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So when I think about the two losses that you just shared, like the loss of How old were you when your mom passed?
She died when I was 13, but she was unwell for 8 years.
Okay. Okay, so I feel like I need to pause in
Yeah.
recognition of your story and what you
Yeah.
went through. And something that you were saying before about the younger version of you when you went through that initial loss and grief is it almost felt like you were kind of doing grief instead of feeling it.
But I didn't even confront, like, I didn't have the language for it. I was not in therapy,
Well, I
you
guess what
know?
I mean by this is that I think sometimes, and please tell me if you think I'm wrong, because you're the one that
Sure.
this is your world.
Sure.
Sometimes I think we actually are doing grief even if we don't know we're doing it. Like, but we might not be doing it in ways that are healthy for us. Like when we're in kind of like an over functioning mode, or we're in a it sounds odd to say, but like an over coping mode. Like I'm going to do yoga and I'm going to do journaling and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And it almost becomes like this mission, this action, instead of like a pause and a settle and like let's actually feel into it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so when you were explaining before, you were at a stage of your life where we're so active. Like we're applying to colleges, we're figuring out what we're going to do with our life, we're making a million friends. Like to your point, we can kind of externally continue doing during the process where grief would be or would live. And then I think of the contrast of you losing your father literally, and I'm like thinking back to the moment that it's like the whole world remembers that moment when we got that call, or we were at my husband's birthday party and we saw the announcement that everyone had locked down, and we're kind of creepishly looking at our friends like, why don't you step a little further away from us?
Yeah. Oh,
Like it was one of
yeah.
those weird moments. But and I was about to give birth, so I was at a weird
Oh my God. Yeah.
point.
5-year-old. That makes perfect sense.
Yep.
Oh my God.
Yep. He was
COVID
born.
baby.
Yep. He was born right at
Wow.
the beginning of lockdown. Like I remember showing up at the
Wow.
hospital and the nurses didn't have masks on and the regulations changed while we were in the hospital. It was nuts. But when I think about your loss then, like you almost couldn't do the doing because the whole world stopped.
Yeah, it was wild.
What was
It's so interesting because it's like I am Jewish. There are many Jewish traditions that come
yes.
with grief and death
Right.
and how the community shows up for you and embraces you and you sit in your grief. You feel your grief. You're forced to, and not in a bad way. I mean,
Is it
grief's
called
never,
Shiva?
you
Am
know,
I
Shiva. You sit
right?
Shiva
Okay.
for 7 days. You are at home. People are coming to you. They are surrounding you with love and care, and you are, face to face with your feelings. We did that for my mom, and we had that when I was a kid. I remember all of it. And we can come back to I want to come back to the idea of like not really doing grief after that though,
Yes.
or even like thinking about grief after that.
Yes.
So put a pin in that. We didn't get any of those rituals when my dad died. No big funeral. We couldn't. We were the
Yeah.
first COVID era funeral for my temple. And I remember walking into the funeral home, them about to shake my hand. And I said, I don't think we should shake hands
Wow.
because
Right.
COVID. We didn't know even that it was like airborne at that point. We weren't masking.
Yeah.
There was so much unknown. So there was no huge funeral. There was no Shiva. There was no community physical presence. I wasn't getting hugs.
Oh
And
my
that
gosh.
is devastating.
Yeah.
And I think that made me, first of all, angry. I think that made me
Understandably.
really,
Yeah.
really angry. It felt so unfair. It felt unfair that we couldn't honor my dad's life. I mean, he impacted thousands of people as a physician in the
Oh,
triangle.
right. Yeah.
And, but what that meant is I was still face to face with my own feelings. They were just overwhelming to me over those few years. And that is why I ultimately left my marriage. That is ultimately why I left my job, because I wanted to do this feeling work. Like I wanted to sit in my grief and understand how I was feeling better. because I had never done that ever in my life. And it turns out that writing about that in a blog and exploring grief resonated with people all over the world, because so many of us feel like we don't have permission in our society to like sit with our grief and feel it, and we don't know how.
It makes me think of the term deserved grief support. Has that term ever come up in your world before? It's kind
Tell
of
me what that, yeah, tell me more.
Yeah, so it's kind of this idea of, from community care to like emotional permission slips, kind of like this space that we provide for the grieving person. And some of us don't receive the deserved grief support that we are warranted. Like I think of people, I have a client I work with who lost her mother recently, and she's in law enforcement in the area, and she got two days. I feel like at that point you don't even know what happened at that point. And so it sounds like for your experience, like you absolutely did not receive the deserved grief support, those permission slips to fully do whatever your personal process looks like. Because it kind of also makes me think, you know that this podcast is specially geared for sensitive people, and not just highly sensitives, because let's be honest, if someone's listening and they're just interested in grief process in general, you can be kind of a more inside the bell curve sensitive person, to use our chat earlier about the bell curve. And something like a loss can throw you outside your norm and create a heightened sensitivity in your nervous system for the period of grief. So I think that's something important for people to understand, that grief can actually make you a more highly sensitive person for the period of time in which you need to process it.
Oh, I think that's really poignant that you say that, because I'm thinking about how I defined myself before my dad died versus after. And before my dad died, I felt like I was the strong friend always. I was the friend who always had her. Can I swear on your podcast?
Yes.
I was the friend that always had her shit together. And I was always the one who other people went to for advice. Other people
Right.
who were emotional and other people who were sensitive came to me for guidance.
Right.
And I relished in that. I relished in being the strong one. And after my dad's death, I started to realize that I had never given myself, and society, I don't think, had really given me permission to see my feelings and feeling my feelings as something that is strong too. And that I viewed sensitivity and feeling all of these things as weak. And you brought up yoga and journaling earlier as an example of like doing grief. And I had never done yoga in my life until my dad died.
Oh, wow.
I was not interested, Amelia. I was literally like, I am not flexible and I never shut the fuck up. So like I am not
like
a
touching
yoga.
your toes is not an important aspect of life, so I'm just not going to do it.
Sounds dumb. Yeah, sounds stupid. I'm never going to do that.
I'd rather read a book.
My therapist was like, listen to me. I'm just begging you to try yoga. Your dad and your mom are gone. You're in the middle of lockdown. Now is the time to try some, like, do some virtual classes, see if you like it.
Yeah.
But I'm begging you to like sit in your sadness and your feelings and do something like yoga that moves your body in a different way and makes space.
Great therapist.
I swear that she's the best. Yoga changed my life, right? Like I was crying a lot at the beginning of just doing yoga for the first time. It gave me physical permission to release and take space and breathe. I had never done anything like that. And once I started to see, oh, okay, I can do a really intense movement and then, go in shavasana for a while or go in child's pose. I give myself permission to just sit in whatever the feelings are that I have, or just be quiet for a while. Yeah. That started opening up my mind into there is strength in being vulnerable. There is strength in facing these feelings that I had never seen as something I wanted to face or was interested in facing before my dad's death.
Gosh, I love that so much because, and it can be different for everyone. Like some people can use all different forms of yoga. It's not like one is going to be the golden ticket. And I do think there's a big difference between like the mindset is so important, right? Like if someone's doing yoga because they want to our point, touch their toes, that's a very different
Yep.
intention than I am going to do this to get curious about what happens when my heart's open. Or you said Shavasana, and the thing that like really imprints on me about that is that that is essentially corpse pose. And a lot of people, when they let themselves like really relinquish to that and connect with that and see what it's like to do and be nothing for a moment and lean into that, the flood of things that can come to you when you make space for it. I think crying in yoga is just, it's amazing and it happens. I've seen, I do a lot of trauma sensitive yoga with my clients.
So you have absolutely seen
So,
this up close.
yeah, absolutely. And it can be very different. Anyone listening who's thinking, okay, well, I don't think that's going to be a great thing for me.
I don't
You
want to
know,
cry in
I don't
yoga.
want to cry. You can also find power in it too. Like you can,
Totally. It was both for me.
right?
It
You
was all
can,
of it.
if it feels good to be in your power for a while, go for it. Like,
Yeah.
and actually, this makes me think of a question I would love to ask you. Like, what if someone, okay, I personally am not a big fan of the whole stages of grief thing.
No, it's bullshit.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's like, yes, we all feel those things, but it just makes it sound like it's this neat little package that happens like
Oh my God.
checkpoints.
Don't even get me started. But yes, we
Wait,
can talk
no,
about that.
start. I do
Oh,
want to hear. Yeah,
oh,
actually, I do want to hear your
oh.
thought on that.
The stages of grief are bullshit. I understand why we want to believe in this model of grief and loss. I get it. I understand where it came from. It came from, such a monumental study in how cancer patients were facing their own mortality and how they were confronting their own sense of grief and loss of themselves. Like that's where
So it wasn't
Kubler-Ross like
about
came.
someone losing someone
No,
else.
no, 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 no.
Oh,
It was
okay.
about someone experiencing this very specific kind of loss. And it was one framework for thinking about what does it feel like to acknowledge that you are going through a loss. There are many different emotional components that go with that. Cool. Then the world latched on to this idea of stages of grief as, ooh, this sounds neat and tidy and a way that I can process and feel like I have checked off and done my due diligence
Right.
working through something that otherwise feels completely insurmountable and completely unworkable. But how
Right.
uniquely American to give it a numbered set of stages and say, like, check, check, check,
Only
I'm
five. You
done.
can't have more.
Yeah, no, we're totally good after that. I have moved on. I have accepted my grief. Yay, me. And we have all bought into that as a society. If you ask the average person what they know about grief, they will probably say something about death and five stages. Those
You're
will be
right.
like that is what people want to believe is true. But the truth is, once you have been through a loss yourself, once you have been in it, you know there are no five stages. You know it is not linear. You know it is like this constant jumble of all kinds of feelings at all times. And once you think you've finished grieving, lo and behold, you hear a song that reminds you of your person and you're crying and
Yeah.
hairs teeter, like, and you're not a failure for that. But the thing is that we have internalized this messaging that, well, if I'm crying again and hairs teeter or laughing or whatever it is, thinking about my person, that I haven't moved on, you feel like a failure maybe. And that's ridiculous. Let's have a
Yeah.
more nuanced view of what grief and grieving actually looks like. And it is forever. Doesn't mean you'll be devastated forever. Doesn't mean it is impossible to carry forever. You get better at carrying your grief over time. And your grief like morphs and changes over time, but it doesn't go away. I'm never going to get over the fact that my dad died. I'm never going to get over the fact that my mom died. That sucks.
Yeah. For
But it's
sure.
not always, like a gut punch anymore. Some days, sure, but I have gotten better at carrying my grief over time.
Yeah. I think that notion, I mean, you put that so well, that notion that there's like a quote, like finish line, or there's a get over portion, or okay, done kind of energy about it. It does feel like it's one of the most pressing toxic issues or toxic culture ideas we have around grief. Are there any other toxic kind of, I don't know, ideas or pressures you think that there have been around grief that you haven't mentioned and you want to make sure listeners think about?
Yeah, I would like to specifically mention non-death related grief if you're open to it.
Please, please.
So I think about divorce and breakup related grief as something that is so taboo to even acknowledge that you might have grief about the end of a marriage, especially if you choose to end that marriage or you choose to end that relationship. I think that what permeates our culture in a very toxic way is this notion that, well, you're better off for it. So why are you
like you have to find a reason kind of thing.
Yeah. Like what is there to grieve about? You know, your marriage was not serving you and so you left it. You ended it. Why should you feel any grief? I don't deserve to feel grief. And I think again, until you've been in that position, until you felt it, I felt this sense of grief that the life that I imagined that I would have by the age of 35 was never going to happen. That was crushing, even though I knew it was better for me in the long run, even though I knew it was the right move to end that marriage. But you don't go into a marriage thinking it's going to end. You go into a marriage with hope and plans and ideas. And the end of that relationship is the death of those ideas and the death of those plans. And you deserve to grieve that too. I do not think we allow people permission to grieve the ends of marriages and relationships. It's like, move on already, start dating, or don't. Like, how dare you start dating? You know, you need to be single for a while. And it's, I think navigating, this is very important to me in our Grieve Leave community and in the community that we founded, is making space for all of those conversations, all of that nuance, that I will grieve the end of my marriage probably forever, and just in little ways. It's okay. But I will always think back to the plans that I once had for my life, the vision that I had for myself at 22 when I got engaged. 24? Hold on. How old was I when I got engaged? 24. I was a little chicken nugget, little babe.
Fact check. No, I'm just kidding.
We met at 22, engaged at 24.
Did you just call yourself a chicken nugget?
I was a little chicken nugget. I didn't know anything.
That's cute.
Love can be so blinding and illogical, and we can make a lot of decisions that maybe aren't like great for us in the long run. Anyway, I think that's huge, and I think we disenfranchise all kinds of losses. We disenfranchise people from being able to grieve the losses that they feel. I think pet loss is something that is deeply disenfranchised.
Yes, like the fact that people won't even give you 24 hours before they're asking if you're going to get another pet. It's like we can't.
My God.
Right? Like we can't handle the thought of the other person grieving, so we have to try to like fix it by making sure that they're going to go do something about it.
It is infuriating, right? It's like we can just sit in the difficulty of that grief. We can sit in their loss for a second and not just go into like, oh yeah, you're going to get a new puppy, right? Like we can't, it's too hard. We haven't been trained as a society for how we can just hold space for the hard things too, which is why I love the work that I do. Let's give people the tools to talk about grief in a way that isn't just platitudes of, you know, everything happens for a reason. It's all going to work out. You know, you're going to be stronger for this. Those kinds of sayings are so well-meaning. People really mean well, and they want to avoid the awkwardness of grief. It is an awkward thing to face. You have to be a little vulnerable yourself to hold someone else's grief. But if we just equip people to say things that are more like, I'm so sorry, and I am here, let's get coffee,
Yeah.
This is so unfair. I care about you. Saying things like that instead of these like empty platitudes, the toxic positivity, that changes how we feel like we can show up in this world. We feel like we can be more authentic in our grief.
Right. I'm so happy you brought up the thing about the grief, the complicated grief with relationships, because I think if
Yeah.
we were going to take it even one step deeper, it doesn't even have to be an end of a relationship that triggers this, because even within, let's say you stay married to the same person for 50 years, within that period of time, there's going to be deaths of that person's personas or different ideas or their health or the perspectives that you once had as a couple. And I feel like those are the relationships that like really do make the long haul, where you give space to each other to grieve. Because how many of us have said, well, you're nothing like the person I met? Or why don't you make me, I've said this, why don't you make me handmade origami anymore all the time? Like, the,
Wait,
yes,
that sounds awesome. Also,
yeah,
I'm
I
very
mean, he
jealous.
proposed with origami. That's all I'm going to say. But
Stop. That's beautiful.
yes, Andrew, origami, please. But, so it's like these moments where I find a lot of people I work with, if they're not willing, and me too, I mean, if I find like I'm stuck in something, if I forget about the grief part, if I forget about feeling the full arc of maybe it's sadness, maybe it's frustration, maybe it's just being royally pissed off about something, and calling it grief. I do think there's something so beautiful about that. Instead of just, well, you should just let it go. It's like, okay, but what about the process before that? So I'm so glad you brought that up. You said tools, and I know that there's not going to be like a special recipe for anyone specific. We're all so unique, but I have to be honest, I'm thinking about people in my own life who have had massive losses and my own griefs as well. And I want to share this with them. Like I want them to listen to this and get some ideas and or recognition. I feel like that's probably going to be one of the tools, like just being recognized for your experience. What would you say are ways that you would want someone to start getting rid of the toxic aspect of grieving and lean into like advocating for themselves or getting what they need?
I love this question. So, first, you already kind of said the first thing that I recommend is
Oh, sorry.
call it grief. No,
Yeah.
call the feeling grief. Name it as grief. Give it a name. Because I think we are scared to use that word. And if we can better define what grief is and what grieving is, then I think we can better navigate this world just as people who will inevitably face it. Just like point blank here, grief is the collection of feelings that come with any kind of a loss: death, losing a job, a diagnosis, your kid getting older. There
Oh,
are
yes.
lots like a child that enters kindergarten for the first time. There is grief in that
Yes, there
because
is.
it is a new stage in that child's life
Yeah.
and you are seeing them grow and change, and it is beautiful and bittersweet. That's there's grief in that for you
Absolutely.
as a parent. All of that grief doesn't have to just be tears and sadness. Grief can also look like joy and laughter and pride and nostalgia. Like it's a big mix. So that's grief. Grieving is how we make space for those feelings.
Oh,
And
I
we
like
can
that.
make space in a variety of different ways. We can make space for those feelings by advocating for ourselves and naming those feelings as grief. Maybe we name them out loud as we talk to our friends and seek community. Maybe we name them for ourselves as we journal and write down those feelings. But then there's this whole other set of ways that we can make space for our grief, that we can grieve. Maybe you want to grieve actively. Maybe that feels right for you. Some people like start running marathons after a loss. I don't understand
Yeah.
those people, but I love that for them.
Grieve the loss of your shins now.
Yeah. But it's so real. Like there's something about taking on new physical challenges. I see this in the grief space all the time. People will go do an Ironman, or they'll take up weight training for the first time, or they'll reinvigorate themselves in a sport they haven't played in forever. I would argue that is a form of grieving. You are intentionally moving your body, and I would say creating more physical space for yourself to actually let out some of these feelings that if you're not moving, maybe you're just kind of holding in and not recognizing are there. It comes back to the yoga conversation. When you move your body in a different way, you see what's in there in a different way.
Right.
Feelings might come out that you weren't even aware of. I would also say, so there's kind of this active bucket, there's the creative bucket of ways you can grieve. So that's journaling.
That's where I lean. I feel like that's
Ooh.
usually, yeah, anytime I've had losses, like I remember one of our miscarriages, I went on Etsy. I love Etsy. And I
Oh,
had
of
like
course.
help like co-design like a necklace with this woman and then kind of carried it around. Or I'm a big fan of, I remember writing a letter to my grandma and then like putting it in, I don't even know if I was allowed to, but putting it in her casket at the field. Like I always feel like this need to create something to kind of, and I mean, duh, I'm an art therapist. So not shocking, but I definitely feel this need to kind of move it. Now, this is the interesting thing. Normally, the way I process stress is through what you're saying, like physical activity. Whereas if I'm grieving, I don't feel as much like I want to lean into physical activity. I want to lean into creative activity. So I wonder if
Bingo.
that kind of shifts and is almost a signal like, oh, maybe I'm not just experiencing regular stress. I might actually be in my grieving stress.
You were wanting to like channel it in a different way.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
I also would say that different ways of grieving feel better at different times in our lives. So like
Yeah.
I think I right now, if you ask me, do I want to run a marathon? I'd be like, no fucking way. That sounds awful. But maybe, actually, honestly, in my earlier 30s, and right before I turned 30, I was in a huge running era, and I had never like done any of that before. And in retrospect, I was very much grieving the near end of my marriage and then the end of my marriage. And there was something
Yeah.
about running that gave me more physical space and gave me like this sense of urgency
Yeah.
around confronting my feelings. And that was different for me. Do I want to run right now? No, I don't want to run at all. It doesn't interest me today.
Right.
I have fall under this other bucket that I would call community as a way to
Oh,
grieve.
okay. Yeah.
How are we coming together with other people to help hold our grief alongside us? I think that this idea that we have internalized that grief is binary, you're either grieving or you're over it, which is false. And this idea that there are 5 stages of grief and when you're done with them, you've succeeded, which is false, makes us feel like we are crazy when that doesn't apply to us. And so when we seek out community as a way to grieve, when we talk to other people, whether that is casually through Grieve Leave hosts many very casual grief events at bars and just
Oh, yeah. How did your Mother's Day one go?
oh my God, it was awesome. I
Oh,
can tell you guys about
good.
that. The sad hour event. It was
Yes.
really special. Not a happy hour, a sad hour. But whether you're coming together like that or you're in a more clinical setting, like a clinical support grief therapy group, that sense of community, that sense of belonging, that sense of, oh, you feel this way too. I'm not crazy. That has so much value. Even commenting on an Instagram post, right? Like we create community online in our chats. We create community in Zoom calls that we host. I think that is life-changing for people who are grieving.
Something about the community piece, it makes me think about when in grief, sometimes the way we want to be communal might be different too. Like I know when I'm grieving, I have to feel very safe with the person that I'm with. And it's almost like I'll start the interaction feeling almost bitter about anyone out there who is smiling. Like almost
Yep.
like if you're in a good space, you're my enemy at this moment,
Yeah.
just for like a moment.
That's
And
how I feel
then,
around Mother's Day. I'm like,
yeah,
I hate every happy family that I
yeah.
see. Anyway, go on. I'm
And
sorry.
then, no. I'm like, I'm totally relating to what you're saying. And then in the moment, it's like I saw this funny meme where it was like a girl who had put like sunglasses on her face, like right when she was about to cry, and the caption says, "I can do anything after I cry." And I'm like, I feel like that's so. I'll enter the space. I'm sussing out people's energy. I have to have a good cry. It's over. The breath comes, and then I can function. It's almost like there's just this kind of evolution of the body, and then I'll be around people. And I think I bring this up because of the highly sensitive nervous system,
Yeah.
because the way we grieve sometimes, like we all have, I'm not saying if you're highly sensitive, you grieve more, but the way your body experiences it can sometimes be so intense.
Yeah.
And creating space where you can do that. I love how you define the difference between grief and grieving. I really liked that. I also really liked how you're not creating another like checklist. Americans, I know we love this, but I do love how you gave like these different buckets. Like maybe there's
Yeah.
the community bucket, which is very healing, the creative bucket, the movement bucket, the
There are
I'm just
more
gonna
buckets. I could keep giving you. There's
many buckets.
so many, right? But there's also um, the solo time, like going inward. I
And
think
that's I think,
matters
yeah.
I had never spent time alone in my entire life until I took, which is like a very weird thing to say, but I actually mean it. I had never lived alone. I had been a serial monogamist my entire, from like
Yeah.
middle school on. I didn't like being alone. And I think that had everything to do with the being raised with a sick parent, very, very afraid of abandonment. And
Yeah.
post my divorce, I was living alone for the first time. Post the death of my father, I was an orphan, at the age of 31. And in COVID lockdown, everyone felt alone to a certain extent. And it was during that time that I decided to quit my job and take this year that I called Grieve Leave to spend more time alone than I had ever spent. And yes, I was traveling and exploring the idea of grief. I volunteered at a grief summer camp for kids who had lost parents. I
Oh,
mean,
that's so beautiful
it was
that
amazing. There were
exists. Yeah.
plenty of communal things that I did, but it was the time I spent by myself that helped me actually understand my grief better because I got quiet enough to really hear it. I found a lot of peace in driving, like going on road trips solo with my dogs in the back. I'd turn off the radio and just be silent for hours. And that sometimes I'd talk to my dad in that time. Sometimes I
Yeah.
would just look at the open road and just be and just think and just
Right.
feel. That is an entirely other, I would say, bucket of grieving. Just that inner solo
Yeah.
time. Um, I will name one more bucket and then I'm going to stop with the buckets of grieving.
Please. I'll make a
There,
visual of the buckets.
I can also send you some too. Like, I mean,
Please. No, I'd love to see it.
when I do trainings for businesses, I do a lot of workplace trainings on how we can support ourselves as grievers at work. And what do these
Oh,
buckets
that's
that
so
I'm naming,
important.
what does it look like in a work environment? Because your grief doesn't like go away when you clock in for work. So
Right.
what does solo time grieving look like in a workplace, for example? And to me, that looks like blocking off 5 minutes in your calendar to go for a walk down the hall, very intentionally.
Yeah.
Anyway, last bucket I'll name is the nature bucket of
Ooh.
when we are deep in our feelings of grief, we can make space for that grief. We can go grieve by connecting with nature, by going on a hike, by literally touching grass, by opening a window in your office and just getting some fresh air, by going for a walk. I think there is something about like hiking up a mountain in particular when you are grieving, that just getting that perspective of land, helping you see further out, that physical interaction with nature can help make space for feelings that doesn't happen in other ways. Or being in water is often like
I love
such a
that.
helpful.
Yeah.
I'm not really a water girly. I'm more of a like mountains girly and like sitting on the side of the beach kind of girly. But getting in water, I hear for other people, is also can give you that kind of perspective. So yeah, those are all these different buckets of grieving, of just
Yeah.
ways that you can connect with your feelings is so important.
Yes. I love the suggestions you had from both kind of an emotional level and a neurological level, to be completely honest, because everything that you suggested, especially with nature, is so regulating to our nervous system and our vagus nerve. And when we're experiencing extreme grief, our vagus nerve can become very dysregulated. Like like I was saying, going into a place and seeing smiling people can feel like a threat. That
Yep.
doesn't really make sense technically,
Yep.
but that's what your body is metabolizing. And so I love the idea of what you're saying of doing these intentional practices. By being in nature, the beautiful thing, you don't have to do anything. Like you just
Period.
are there. But then I also think of it kind of on this, I might get a little metaphysical here, but
Yeah.
depending on what people believe or how they see loss, in a way, ashes to ashes, if we go back to the earth, it's kind of a way to be closer, I imagine.
Yes. Yes. Like really grounded
Yeah,
in something that is like so essentially, yeah, it's so essential. Actually, that's the word. Like getting back to
right.
what the essential pieces of life are. It is the world around us. It is ourselves like in those spaces. Totally. I also just want to name that I clinical support is so important for people who are grieving, but it is not the only way to grieve. And I think many folks get stuck in this mindset of, well, I need to heal from my grief, quote unquote. And so I need clinical intervention and a therapist
Right. It's
and
not a disorder.
whoever. It's not a disorder. And that's not to say that there is like a normal amount of pain you should or should not be feeling. And like only you know if you and the people who love you the most can also help see this for you, if you need and deserve clinical support, right? But
Yes.
we don't, we cannot as a society let grief support solely be in the hands of clinicians. It is all of our responsibility to make a little more room for grief in our daily lives because it is so human. It is
Right.
not a disorder. You are so normal for feeling grief. So why don't we just be a little more honest about it and talk about it a little more realistically, a little more openly and honestly, which is why I love hosting events like Sad Hour, which we hosted for Mother's Day at a bar that I love in downtown Durham, North
Which one?
Carolina, Killer Queen.
Okay.
It's a
Okay.
cute, super cute wine
Very
bar.
Durham.
So Durham, which I love. I say that very lovingly.
Yes. No, Durham is like where we go to eat and see
Dude,
music. It's my favorite. Yeah. I'm
oh my
very
God.
lucky to be right in the middle of the triangle. So
You get
zip over
it.
there.
We
Yeah.
are so cool. If I may say so myself, we host grief support events that don't feel like grief support. It's not what you would think of. You
Right. Grieving
might
doesn't mean you
imagine,
can't laugh.
like, we can chill over a glass of wine
Yeah.
and we're literally like talking about things that in any other setting, people would be like, that's, whoa, like, that's too much. But at a grieve leave event, at a sad hour, or at a meet and grieve event,
Oh, meet and
you
grieve.
can
Gosh,
just,
you are like
yeah.
killing it with these names.
Yeah, we call kind of the umbrella for the events that we host is meet and grieve events. So we'll
Yeah.
host a meet and grieve exercise class, for example, or
Oh, cool.
sad hours at bars. And in those spaces, you have permission to get real with people because you've all decided to show up at a place knowing that you are grieving something or you're supporting someone else who is. And so at the sad hour, people say things to each other like, so what brings you here? Like,
Yeah.
who's your like, what's up with
Who
you and
brought you
your
here?
mom? Yeah,
Yeah.
like what's going on? And that immediately breaks the ice, and people
I love
just have
that.
very real conversations. And it's not always tears. Like you're laughing in the corner about some ridiculous stuff that happened. And what a joy that it is to have permission to
Right.
be, you know, I'm going to use the word maybe sensitive, like to talk about the things that are emotionally sensitive in a really safe environment to do that in, that maybe you feel like you can't say elsewhere. I hope that we keep building as a culture that we can talk more openly and honestly outside of those
Right.
spaces too, but
Right.
we're not there yet.
I mean, it's so evident because if you think about when you're, I don't know, stressed from work, it's so common to say, oh, I'm feeling stressed out. Oh, I'm feeling anxious. But how often do we hear someone to say, oh, I'm feeling grief?
If we heard that more, I think so many people would be like, "Oh, me too." Yes.
Yes. I love
Thank you
that.
for saying you're grieving. That helps
Yeah.
me recognize that we're grieving all the time. Like we really are. We just
Right.
once we start noticing it, right? We grieve all kinds of things.
Right.
Like losing a job, again, a job transition or
Right.
graduation season, big time for grief. It's beautiful and it's hard.
Yeah. I'm glad that what your community and what your business is doing is making it. I also like the idea of making it okay to be okay. Like it's okay to not be okay,
Yeah.
and it's also okay to be okay. Because I think
Whatever you
sometimes
feel.
there's this
Yeah.
kind of contradiction or like a guilt that sometimes people feel when they are. I mean, honestly, oh gosh, I had the funniest moment at my grandma's funeral, and like we still think back on all the makeup they put on her because that woman never
Oh
wore
my God.
makeup in her life. She looked so crazy. Like, and it was like the laughter that we felt and that we got to experience. Like that's part of the grief story. It didn't mean that we weren't sad. You can be both and.
Yes.
I want to say one thing. Gosh, I could talk to you forever, but I got to say one more thing about what you were saying about the clinical piece. I do think, as a
Yeah.
clinician, there's one thing I want to throw out there.
Yeah.
I fully agree. Grief is not a disorder. It's normal. In fact, I think about my students I teach in a counseling program where sometimes they try to box it in too much. Okay, well, this person is probably depressed because they've been grieving for
Mm.
more than a month.
Mm.
And it's just like, no, no,
Mm.
let's not be so black or white about this. However, I do think it's important not to misinterpret grief and something like depression or grief
Yes.
and anxiety because prolonged grief can cause things like depression and anxiety. So if that is what you're experiencing, like if you are, you can do something simple like even taking a personal checklist or something and just
Yep.
checking in on yourself. If what you're feeling is so persistent, it might be a good idea to have a clinician to support you in addressing the depression or the anxiety, but also
Yes.
recognizing, I brought up that one client before. We've noticed a huge spike in her depression symptoms since losing her mom. Luckily, I had assessed her before. We were able to do another assessment just a couple weeks ago, and it doubled like her traits, the symptoms. And I said to her, I said, okay, so let's treat the depression, but let's also see what happens when we continue leaning into your grief and your grieving process. I would expect that some of those depression symptoms are
Yeah.
going to soften. The edges will
Yeah.
soften a bit. So I do think there's a place for both, but I think to your point, grief is not, even though you probably could find it in the DSM, but it is not a disorder. I'm saying that.
Oh
That's
my
my
God,
opinion.
100%.
Yeah.
I love that you are bringing like the nuance here to this discussion about what is clinical versus what is normal versus what deserves what kind of support. And again, it
Right.
comes back to you as the individual, like, and the people who love you, right? You
Right.
know, with your heart, if you feel so low that you don't want to get out of bed for a really, really long time, right? Like
Right.
it is that nuance of feeling over time. I'll add that we have an upcoming event this weekend, actually, in Asheville.
Oh,
To
if it was in Durham, I would have popped by.
Well, this one is in partnership with New Belgium Brewery, and we
Mm.
are hosting a meet and grieve event to honor the grief that first responders to
Oh,
Hurricane Helene are
oh my
still
goodness.
feeling,
That's so
and that
important.
we've never really given them permission to acknowledge the amount of loss that they saw face to
Yes.
face,
Oh,
and their
that's so
families,
wonderful.
having
Yep.
their loved one be gone on the front lines for days at a time, and you don't know if they're going to come back. That is, there's so much grief and trauma and a lot of other
Yes.
things mixed in there. So for that meet and grieve event, we also invited local clinicians from mental health
Oh,
groups
awesome.
to
Hmm.
come just be there, to be there, folks who are accepting new patients, to just be there and say, to folks who have attended, if you want additional support, like if you're looking for more, here's how to get in touch with me. Because it is this both and.
Yes.
Community matters. Having a beer with someone at New Belgium who also was on the front lines of Hurricane Helene,
Yeah.
like just being able to relate to their grief is part of it. That is part of the grieving that needs to happen so people feel better. But man, so many folks also deserve this additional layer of support, this different layer of support that only clinicians can provide. I wish there were more clinicians. I wish there were a bigger supply, so more people who want that kind of mental health support can get it. But yeah, I think you are spot on. Of course you are.
Well, and you and I will have to stay connected because I'm really
Yeah.
interested in supporting your mission, what you're doing in the area, because we are in the same area, which doesn't
Yes.
happen often when I get to talk to folks.
Yes.
I did have Ashley on here a while
Ah,
back, so that was fun.
amazing. It is a small world that I feel like always leads back to North Carolina because we are
Hmm.
the best state
I
and
mean,
we're clearly the best. But I love that we've connected, and I'm grateful for the conversation and
me
grateful for you. Thank
too.
you for bringing your perspectives
Oh.
to the world.
Well, thank you to you as well. And so I want to know for anyone who's been listening today who is, really feeling like this makes a lot of sense for their life, or maybe even someone that you love and you're thinking they would do so well. Maybe they're not going to jump to North Carolina, but what kind of, different resources or things are out there that you offer and where can they find those?
Yes. Our Grieve Leave community is very robust online. You can find us everywhere. I think our most active community is on Instagram. So at Grieve Leave, that's GrieveleAve. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on TikTok. You will find plenty of funny memes. You will find plenty of just great perspectives from fellow grievers. You will find advice for people who are supporting grievers. All of that. You can also find us on LinkedIn too. Sign up for our newsletter at grieveleave.com. We share a weekly blog with just great perspectives in it, covering the gamut of all different types of grief. And we often focus on how to support yourself at work. And then we have a podcast that is
Oh,
entering its second season called Griefed
cool.
Up.
Okay.
And if you want to go hear more expert thinkers in the grief space, or just other people who have experienced all different kinds of losses, from retired NBA players to artists, you name it, we talk to them on Griefed Up. So our podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Rebecca, for coming. I'm excited to stay connected, and I hope everyone has a good rest of your day. Be well, everyone.